Thank you all for being here. Welcome to our second webinar, Gaza's Reconstruction and the Question of Justice. Special thanks, of course, to those joining us from back home and across the region. Despite everything that is happening, we hope you and your families are safe and that this war will end soon. Today's webinar explores how the relationship between hegemonic and counter-hegemonic plans for Gaza's reconstruction is shaping Gaza's present and future spaces, and how justice is articulated within these frameworks. The title of today's webinar is in some ways paradoxical. When we see the destruction of Gaza, many of us feel a concrete sense of hopelessness and disbelief that it can ever be rebuilt. You know that feeling that when you look at the images, the live streamed videos, and think, how could this possibly be rebuilt? At the same time, when we see the people in Gaza, their revival, resilience, steadfastness, in and around the ruins of their homes and city, we feel the opposite. There is no way the city will not be rebuilt. No way these people will not revive and reconstitute their identities and their spaces. In our previous webinar, Repositioning the International Discourse of Gaza Reconstruction, we discussed how urban planning has become one of the main arenas of struggle between hegemonic and counter-hegemonic reconstruction plans. On the one hand, we see Riviera-style fantasies and Israeli governmental visions of a clean Gaza, sanitized, securitized, and effectively emptied of Palestinians, a shifting long-term form of herbicide. On the other hand, we also learned and heard about counter plans in which reconstruction is mobilized to counter herbicide through rubble removal, shelter and housing, community healing facilities, rehabilitation of basic infrastructure, and support for local community economics, even as these efforts are repeatedly interrupted. At the heart of these dynamics lies the question of justice. Many dominant justice frameworks in the global north, whether liberal or Marxist, do not fully capture what is at stake in Gaza, because they focus on how goods, rights, or opportunities are shared within an existing order rather than on the ongoing violence and dispossession that produce and reproduce that order. So today, we want to ask, what injustices can Gaza's reconstruction reproduce? How can reconstruction be driven by and accountable to justice? What do we actually mean when we speak about justice in Gaza's reconstruction? And how do Palestinian planners and communities ground reconstruction in other concepts of justice, such as restoration, restitution, return, reparation, and decolonization? We are fortunate to have three speakers whose work engages precisely these questions. Youssef Jabarin, Professor Youssef, a prominent urban planning scholar, has given us a conceptual vocabulary for understanding herbicide, what he calls the architecture of dispossession in various Palestinian spaces. Dr. Alessandra Gola, co-founder of the Yala Project, is an architect and scholar whose work focuses on justice in urban planning in Palestine. She's one of the leading planners of Gaza Phoenix plan, the reconstruction framework developed within and for the Union of the Municipalities of Gaza. Dr. Abdurrahman Kittani is an architect and scholar of architectural history and post-war reconstruction and one of the leading planners of two of the Gaza Phoenix plan, bringing together theory and practice around urban regeneration in Palestine. I'm Orwa Switat, postdoctoral research associate in Palestinian Studies at the New Direction in Palestinian Studies initiative at the Center for Middle East Studies at Brown, and I will moderate our session. Each speaker will have about 15 minutes. I will then offer some comments linking their interventions to the broader question of justice and reconstruction, and we will open the floor for Q&A. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box. Let me start with our first speaker, whom I'm honored to introduce, Professor Youssef Jabarin. Youssef is a professor of urbanism and sustainability and serves as associate editor of planning theory one of the leading journals in urban planning. His work offers a critical analysis of Israeli dispossessive urbanism and the territorial, social, political, demographic planning regimes shaping the various Palestinian spaces, including the Galilee, the Nakab, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. Today, he will focus on analyzing the international and the Israeli discourses of reconstruction and the logics behind those plans for Gaza. Yusuf, thank you for joining us today. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Urwa, for this important session. Even though the world's eyes have shifted away from Gaza, but all the eyes will be back to Gaza, hopefully in near days, in near future, because it is one of the most important political, geopolitical, human issue. It's not only the Gaza question, it is the Palestinian question at large, which reveal injustice and distorted geopolitical order, world order. So today, so this is important session, and thank you very much again. Today, I want to examine the most influential reconstruction plans. I review all the plans that related to Gaza, but I want to focus only on the most influential plans for Gaza. These day after plans were produced by think tanks and research centers that are closely linked to the US administration and the Israeli government, and they have been governed mostly by retired military figures aligned with both from the IDF, the CIA, and other American military branches. So my aim is to reconstruct these plans in order to uncover the political order embedded within them. In fact, I want to show that reconstruction is not simply about rebuilding Gaza after the destruction and after the herbicide. Reconstruction is chiefly being used to shape Gaza's and the Palestinian nation geopolitical future. It's not only about Gaza, it's about entire Palestine. So more specifically, I ask how these plans, how these proposals frame reconstruction and what kind of political and territorial order they seek to establish, and what this means for Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination. These are the significant questions behind the idea of reconstructing Gaza and rebuilding Gaza. So my central argument is that these plans are not neutral, technical, or professionally detached reconstruction plans. Rather, they are political projects embedded in a broader regime of domination. In fact, these proposals are already influencing Gaza's geopolitical trajectory at these days. These plans have been the base, beside the military, they have been the base that shape the direction of Gaza peace deal and the implementation of some grand decisions, mainly the UN Security Council Resolution 2803, which have been based on these plans. The UN Security Council resolution is no more than implementation of the Israeli United States think tank plans for the day after, for Gaza, for rebuilding Gaza. Thus, I argue that these plans embody distinct political order. They are not naive, of course. By this political order, I mean a coherent regime of socio-political, territorial, and economic practices that all built into the reconstruction process. It's a coherent political order that come, in fact, to finish the unfinished project of the Israeli unfinished project of colonizing Palestine, mainly now Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. This project is unfinished. So the herbiciding of Gaza come, in fact, and the rebuilding come to finish what has not been finished as a project, as a colonial project. In this sense, reconstruction does not function as a humanitarian response, of course. It functions as an extension of war by other means, by the discourse of rebuilding and reconstruction and Riviera, all of this what we are going to see in a minute. So this plan seeks to complete what military violence began, what the herbiciding project began. Not only the destruction of Gaza urban fabric, but also the restructuring of its political, social, and territorial future, including the future, as I said, of the West Bank, Area C, which has been now 60% of the West Bank, which has been now totally under the Israeli control, and East Jerusalem, which has been totally under the Israeli control in terms of demographic and territorial agenda. So I'm speaking about a broader geopolitical agenda. It's not literally simply the notion of reconstruction, what we have been learning from Marshall plans in Western Europe, and then in Eastern Europe, in Japan, etc. So under this logic, Gaza is imagined as a political community with no right of sovereignty, but as a site of externally engineering intervention and new imperial project. This is the main idea. Let me start with the image we see now. The image to the right is the one of the plans, the Riviera of Gaza. So there are many plans, but I'm only focusing on the most important ones. The first plan, bear in your mind that the first plan has been prepared by the Israeli Institute for National Security Studies think tank, the INSS think tank. This, in fact, this think tank and this plan, in fact, build the security and geopolitical territorial agenda of the entire project. So we should not think that all of a sudden President Trump decided to have the Riviera. No. It's not at all in this side. The idea, everything has been planned during the first days, in the first days of the war in the 7th of October, and then the war in Gaza. So then the plan of post-war Gaza, the Washington Institute, which is less important, but the Riviera plan, and mainly the recent plan of the Sunrise plan, the Project Sunrise, which is a new Gaza, a new unified Gaza. These projects, the entire projects of Gaza that have been adopted, all of them are initiatives unfunded by Israeli businessmen, and they have been conducted by Boston Consulting Group. And the most important thing, all of these plans have been designed by the AI. So if you ask the AI, please rebuild Gaza and build something, you will see that you will come with similar plans. Now there are the other plans which are less, which has almost no influential, even though, as Urwa said, these are come from the ground, etc. But these plans are, meanwhile, they don't send the agenda. The poorly professionally poorly plan of Egypt, the government of Egypt, which was presented to the Arab League, and then the Palestinian Authority plan, which is very weak, has no power, and then the Imagine Gaza of France, which has been done and promoted also by Israeli leftist guy, but was presented and was submitted to President Macron. And then the Phoenix Gaza, which is a plan that I respect so much, come from the grassroots, from down, from the bottom to up, but you know, it's like it doesn't have any influential. So the plans. So my idea is to understand these plans that have been giving the tone. In fact, there is no such, there is a deconstruction methods for understanding and analyzing discourse, and there is discourse analysis, etc. But for planning, we need something new. So I develop a new framework for reconstruction plans. I have no time here to present it, but the idea is based on how the plan conceive what is proper, improper, what is freedom, what is domination, include, exclude, visible, invisible, legitimate, not legitimate, security, not insecurity, all of these things, all of these dichotomies. I was looking in each plan what the plan, in order to understand them, what are these plans telling us. At the end of the day, I come up with a conceptual framework. This is to understand the entire discourse of these plans and to understand their practices, so we can understand it through 5 concepts. All of them come to the foundational concept, which is the idea of new imperialism. And these have the radicalization, dispossession, municipalization, and demilitarization. These are the major concepts that I'm going to present now, and then to end with some conclusion. The first concept is the new imperialism. As we remember, all this, the images are taken from the plans and the images that President Trump sent through his social media, that he submitted through his social media. So he said that Gaza is a symbol of death and destruction. It couldn't be built by the same people. It couldn't be built again by Palestinians. So the US will take over the Gaza Strip. It is similar. The United States will take over Tehran, and the United States will take over Venezuela. But this started with Palestine, with Gaza, because the Israeli discourse is very strong within the American administration and political culture. So this concept of new imperialism that the plan suggests to us, these are the foundational logic that shaping that shape the control of Gaza. And this is, as Edward Said told us, that this is new imperialism. It's like to control the others from remote control, from away, and from distance. This is the major idea. But all the resources, all the geopolitical settings, we will set the tone and we will define everything, as President Trump said. The other concept of these plans is the demilitarization. So the idea there is that a multinational authority will control Gaza. Israel will control the security agenda all the time. And this has been also adopted by the Security Council Resolution 2803 regarding dismantling Gaza. So this has been a major concept of the Israeli plans of the day after. And so also other thing, me as a planner, as an urban planner, I make this sort of an analysis of these plans, and I saw that these plans are using in terms of where to build the cities, how to make the cities, where the people, where to build the housing of the people, where to build everything. So the idea, it has been took, as the plan themselves says, has been took from Haussmann of Paris. In the mid of the 19th century, Haussmann rebuilt Paris, and his idea was how also to control and to make stronger security within the city of Paris in order to prevent any future revolution. And the idea was building boulevards, streets, and to dismantle the communities, etc. So this is the idea. It's written there. This is the idea of rebuilding Gaza. The other thing in the building Gaza, so through the militarization, it's the evacuation of the population. The idea of the plans in to build, like to start with Rafah, new Rafah, to have like 50,000 residential apartments. They are going planning in these days. And the idea, in fact, is to host Gaza. Instead of hosting now about a little bit more than 2 million, the entire Gaza will host less than 500,000 population, and the rest will be displaced from Gaza. The third one, which is a major concept, it is the municipalization of the Palestinian question, and in this sense, the municipalization of Gaza question is to transform the entire project of the Palestinian question into a municipal agenda. This is what we have been learning from Oslo Agreement since 1993 till now. So the Palestinian Authority, the idea of Palestinian Authority today, as its power, it's about municipal, or it's a municipal organization. So the idea of the plans is to convert Gaza to municipal idea, and it has been also written there with the decision of the UN's decision 2003 to create a political professional Palestinian body. So at the present, the peace order of Mr. Trump has established a new Palestinian technocrats. These technocrats has no power, no legitimate power, no moral power, no legal power in Gaza. But they are technocrats. Part of them were part of the PA, of Fatah, of other organizations. But these are this is the Palestinian technocrat who is going to control Gaza. And the idea of the public has been shifted. So there is no public. The Gaza people are not public, but labor people. These are labor, proletarian, only to reconstruct and to do the hard job in reconstruction of Gaza. And the public is the entire world. In fact, the public for Gaza, the new public, the new imagined public for Gaza are the business elite in the world, the billionaires in the United States, etc. These are so this is why we need the plan present Gaza as a smart city, ecological, sustainable city. The fourth concept is dispossession. This idea is clear. So the idea is privatization, to build a new private public-private partnership. The public partnership is not the public-private partnership is not with the Palestinian as public or Palestinian government. The public government here are the business elite in the world, and this is the idea. In fact, so this is a new model of reconstruction and rebuilding, and the redefinition of what public mean. And the idea is which is striking. So the idea is to build a trust, to confiscate the entire lands of Gaza. It's sort of nationalization of Gaza lands. 70% of this land will be market to business elite from the United States, Israel, elsewhere. And the idea is that these people will come, the business elite will come and rebuild Gaza. In fact, it's a total, complete dispossession of the Palestinian lands. This is against any law, any justice concept, etc. But the idea is to build a new hub, new transportation hub.
Yosef, the last minute, please. If you can conclude.
Yes, the last one. Yes, the last one, the fifth concept is the de-radicalization of the Palestinian. The Palestinian in these plans are defined as defeated nation. So the idea is about social engineering. So the Palestinians are asked to change their behavior, their political behavior, not to be radical, not to resist the occupation, etc. And importantly, to change entirely in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and in the West Bank to change the educational system to be more moral and accept the others, in fact, occupation, and to change the mindset, to change the mentality of the Palestinians as a nation of resistance to a defeated nation. So these are come together. These concepts come together, and the main foundation, it's about to build a new geopolitical day after order. It's what I call it. It's the new imperial conditions that aim, in fact, to build a new geopolitical order that define what is proper, what is improper for the Palestinians. And in fact, to finish with this, in fact, the idea is uh, to dismantle and to finish the unfinished project. This is my feeling, my strong feeling in these days, that the idea, and reading the Israeli discourse, political discourse in the last 3 years, since 7 of October 23, is the idea is to finish the unfinished project. This is why we see huge total control of over Area C, East Jerusalem, the entire of West Bank, and now also the idea of Gaza. It is in fact to dismantle, to finish, and to complete to remove from the global order, political order, the Palestinian questions. Thank you, Orwa.
Thank you, Youssef. Thank you for an important, very important analysis and framework that give us an analytical tool to understand what's going on and what are the logics behind these reconstruction plans, which lays the ground for our new next speaker, Dr. Alessandra Gola. Alessandra is an architect, scholar, and researcher whose work focuses on the relationship between the built environment and identity, especially in context of conflict. She's also an adjunct professor at Birzeit University and co-founder of the YALA project, and in this interdisciplinary research hub based in Palestine. Together with Palestinian planners, Gaza municipalities, and communities, she's one of the authors of the Gaza Phoenix plan, which has become a key reference for thinking about reconstruction in Gaza, grounded in justice. So, Alessandra, Youssef questions the ability to the ability to have an impact through the Gaza Phoenix plan. So please refer to that and how you see the theory of justice informing the design of your work, please.
Okay, so thank you, and good morning or good evening, everyone, and thanks Ottawa and Brown University and all the hosting platform for inviting me today. It's quite heavy now to present after the disarming discouraging landscape that was painted by Professor Jabarin, which is definitely true. Indeed, I agree with his interpretation. So what is left, what we are left in general with, after reflecting upon this mainstream and let's say prominent new about the intent and politics of this new colonial system that is trying to take over Gaza, but also the rest of Western Asia, is that okay, then everything is done, everything is planned, and there is nothing we can do. So I'm here tonight representing a part of the Gaza Phoenix team, and actually I am the only one in the team that doesn't have any Arab heritage whatsoever. So I am a little bit playing as the bridge between, let's say, different spheres that are marketed as competing, which thing I do not believe in at all. So today's presentation gives me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the underlying theory and posture and position and criteria that guide that are embedded in the Gaza Phoenix that was mentioned earlier today, but also in the first episode of this series of lectures and this webinar. So the Gaza Phoenix is this kind of like underdog plan that came out against against the superpowers. And I would say it's a work that we could define as I would see all our work as a team as working against all odds, and who knows. But I would like to first connect with something that actually Orwa said at the beginning. That was the previous view and the let's say mainstream proposals that we are seeing are, as Orwa, using Orwa's terms, clean and sanitized. Definitely two terms that belong, especially for those who are from architectural theories, they belong to modernism and modernity. So modernity was seeking for cleaning, rationalizing, and sanitizing, especially when this was applied to colonial contexts. And these words come out again today, 100 years and more after that period. And connecting with instead the presentation of Professor Jabreen, we can say that there is, we were saying about this new colonialism, and therefore we are using this kind of like cleaning and sanitized as a sort of new modernity coming. And in this way, I could say that the Gaza Phoenix is positioning itself definitely again and more strongly as a postmodernist posture and as a postmodernist thinking that was, let's say, materialized into this proposal. And I would like to draw the attention of the audience on the fact that what I'm going to present today, and I think also the second speaker, Abdel Rahman, it's something that transcends the Gaza concept and the Gaza context itself. But it is an, let's say, a defying exercise that pertains and informs also many other contexts, also in the West. So I would like to start by saying that the main underlying, let's say, idea that we have to familiarize with in general, anytime you look at any plan, any image, and any activity that pertains life on the ground, is that there is nothing as such as neutral in this field. Everything is political, especially because we are working with everydayness, with the life of people and the space they produce their life, they enact their life. And politics here, I would like to remind you, it's something, a very important point for the Gaza Phoenix. It is not a politicized tool, which means that it's not politically colored, that it doesn't belong to a party, because it belongs to the civil society and its interests, and also the local interests, you will see it later, intended as human and non-human better interests, which means that it doesn't belong to a specific party. It doesn't have a color. But still, this is a political idea, but not a politicized one. So here I take it a little bit also from my Italian background. I'm showing you something that I think is very important, that everyone who is watching any proposal, not just the Gaza Phoenix proposal, but any map that you're seeing projected anywhere, is that is an embodiment of ideas, of criteria. So whatever you see in maps actually embeds what matters to us and that what we consider as important in shaping our vision of the world. Was it past, something that already happened? What would I like to summarize in a visual tool like a map? or in the future. It's a future projection. So, for example, here you're seeing, I brought as an example a very old practice. This is the gallery of maps in the Vatican City. Pope Gregory the 13th decided to have this project. This was a promenade inside the Vatican City. The maps that you're going to see here collected were not exactly a picture, a neutral picture of what was there, but it is a political statement of controlling space. Some of these maps actually do not represent some things and represent things that didn't still exist back in the days. Why do I care about this? It is because, for example, if you see these kind of maps, the plans, they are a future vision. They are so different from what is actually on the ground. That is what you see on the right side, a satellite picture. So what we were seeing and all those plans that are, let's say, mainstreamed and politically backed, share something that is concerning, that is the accumulation by dispossession, and also they are an embodiment of disaster capitalism. So in different ways, they are very close to these two concepts that belong to or refer to primarily Naomi Klein and David Harvey. And also, this is a discourse that is being debated on the Gaza Strip about accumulation by dispossession and disaster capitalism, as we have seen also in the previous presentation. So the Gaza Phoenix came out with an underlying big question that is a different approach possible? Is it everything done? Or is it something different possible? So is it possible to envisage a paradigm that makes less of what is essential for the dominating neoliberal planning practice that is based on money, funds, and political coloring, political backing? Is it possible, or is it something impossible? So the Gaza Phoenix came out. This is very important for me to underline, as a systematic, unfunded project. So there is not €1, not $1 being put by anyone. We have no monetary funds. We are using other kinds of capital. So it's a non-capitalist exercise if we talk about capital as monetary capitals. But the world is made of so many other capitals that we all hold and that we cannot be dispossessed of. So the first capital that we count on is centering on the everydayness. This is something that even when we are bare humanity, the everydayness never disappears. Somehow it stays. And therefore, centering the everydayness means that we are also centering on a grounded approach, which means that you have to know the historical and current process of communities, of their praxis. So I'm using also Bourdieu's an author that somehow is contested because of his, let's say, post or mid-colonial involvement. But the local praxis is something core, who, like the actors, what they do and their habits. This is reminding something that I think the American part of the audience probably will remember. You maybe remember the slogan, "We are the 99%. So it was a movement that somehow appeared and disappeared, but still that thing is true. We are the 99% against that small percentage that is trying to take over. Grounding is our first asset. Grounding means also then, therefore, we have to mobilize a collective paradigm as the second and equivalently important asset, which means that if it's not money, what else we have? Ourselves, our habits, time, knowledge. Knowledge is not just the one that we learned through the books, but it's also what we as communities develop throughout centuries of our history and our relationship with the physical space that we inhabit. And here, like one of the criteria that is leading what then materialized as a plan is the importance of the quintuple helix. So the collaborativeness that centers on nature as the basic asset for humanity and non-human beings. We are just one part of a system. Humanity is not the only thing that is important. And there, civil society, government, so institutions, any sort of them, the productive part, and the academia. The collaborative paradigm then also centers on, as I was anticipating, the human, non-human collaboration. So humans are not the only thing that exist. There are superior and supranational values that we do not have to be distracted from when we are kind of tunneled inside the idea that this is a strip, these are the boundaries. Right, the Gaza Phoenix had to work and plan within certain given boundaries because we have to root also in reality and what we are working for, the civil society and its representatives. But we cannot forget that we are a broader, and actually we have to claim the centrality of the Gaza Strip as a part of a whole and not as an isolated entity. So recentering the narrative and repossessing the narrative. So for example, the scheme, we start now like summing up all these criteria. One of the maps that you're seeing is trying to translate the idea into something specialized. So from the idea of spatial justice, we are transitioning towards specializing justice. All these criteria, this agency that we want to give back, which means that also I recognize rights. In the moment I recognize rights, I recognize the agent. The rights are for something or someone. So this core scheme, the concept of the green and blue spine, was specializing the idea of the collaboration between the human and non-human entity. There is no humanity without its physical space. But also, it means that I think about, recognizes the right of mobility. This informs, therefore, a map that treats mobility within a broader idea. And now I'm summing up the last couple of slides. So informing mobility means that also it's not just to allow movements, but also to make it possible to stay. So it's the freedom of choice. There is also a relationship that sometimes was criticized about, yeah, but what is your positioning within a broader political environment? This is a map that actually is extracted from the Gaza Phoenix, but actually it belongs to a former plan by the Palestinian Authority, which is a hint to the fact that we recognize Gaza as part of a broader entity. And also it's emphasizing the process. So these maps are not a final outcome. It's not a frozen vision. It's something on horizon to tend to, but it's also something that is moving and flexible and dynamic. Therefore, the Gaza Phoenix is also focusing on a kind of cyclical system of producing and reproducing the idea, and also dealing with uncertainty as something, let's say, core to its values, to be ideal but also pragmatic somehow. Finally, this very last thing is that images here, all the imagery, as I said, is not an output. Imageries are used, including the master plan, is not a decision taken. It's a negotiation device. It's something that helps deciding and debating, is this okay? And if it is okay for some of the communities, we can stretch and change and delete. If it's okay, then how to do that? Is it even feasible? So also, like these no pre-packed solutions provide all these maps and also roadmaps that help the discussion between and enable the discussion between beneficiaries and proponents on as peers and not as someone superior and someone subdued. And that's the very final part, that is again how using the images as a way, a device to think through together with an agency, international and local agencies, to collaborate together towards a shared images of future that might be this, but also very well might not be this. So thank you very much. I think that in a nutshell, I said everything.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. Just seeing these images, brings, I don't know, like maybe hope to our hearts. So thank you for the remarkable work that you're doing that basically confronts also the challenge of translating these theoretical concepts and the decolonial agenda that you're bringing into the actual practice of reconstructing Gaza. This challenge, of course, leads us to our third speaker that I'm honored also to introduce, Dr. Abdulrahman Kittania. Abdulrahman is a Palestinian architect and scholar whose work examines urban resilience, architectural history, post-war reconstruction, and the intersections of cities and conflict. He's currently a postdoctoral fellow at Tampere University and an assistant professor in the Department of Architectural Engineering and Planning at Birzeit University. He plays a leading role, too, in formulating the Gaza Phoenix plan that we just saw. It's through Alessandra's talk, bringing together theoretical work into practice. Abed, building on what Alessandra has presented, and in light of what Youssef also has analyzed, how do you understand Gaza Phoenix and your work on Gaza's reconstruction more broadly as a practice that counters herbicide? And how do you translate those ideas and values and visions and principles of justice into concrete planning practice under current ongoing conditions of herbicide? Please, Ahmed.
So, thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Arwa, for inviting me for this very important discussion. And thanks to Dr. Youssef Jabarin as well for this very saddening or terrible but very enlightening forecasting of what's happening. But also thank you, Alessandra, for setting the floor for me to talk more about the Gaza Phoenix from theory to space. And in this presentation, I will move from the theoretical foundations of the Gaza Phoenix framework to its spatial and architectural strategies. So to make it more material for you and to see how such theories like decoloniality or spatial justice or anti-herbicide planning can translate into urban and architectural interventions in such an environment like Gaza nowadays. So in this regard, I can say that the Gaza Phoenix framework has a clear intellectual architecture where the theory influences the agenda and the agenda shapes basic principles and the principles generate specific criteria and then these criteria guide us to the spatial plans or took us to the spatial plans. So I think this is a unique example for a methodological structure in post-war planning in general. So in a quick overview, the principles of the Phoenix were generated following a theoretical grounding and elaborate discussions about the local agenda for the post-war period. And as you can see here, they are all aligned with our theoretical principles, which Alessandra spoke a bit about, and they are all politically aware, progressive, and anti-colonial principles. And I have to mention here that other post-war reconstruction plans and frameworks might have also or share some of these principles, like the Egyptian plan, the theoretical part of it, for example, includes something like this, but when translated into spatial logic, many of these principles disappeared in the operational plans. So, for us, in order to go from principles to actions, we had to tailor our main theoretical, political, and ethical guidelines that we call the criteria. So, in the Phoenix, we have 6 criteria that you can read here. And these criteria guide all spatial recommendations in the Phoenix framework, and also they are used to evaluate and critique plans or ideas or concepts coming from other actors or from other frameworks. So if in case the municipalities want to critique a framework or a plan, they can use these principles or these criteria to evaluate them. And so, as you can hear, these criteria as well, they are very much related and derived from the theoretical grounding of social and spatial justice, resilience, anti-colonial planning, restoring identity, and so on. So before we go to the spatial translation of our criteria, we have to mention our matrix actually. So the Phoenix matrix is not only a planning tool, it is a participatory governance system that organizes reconstruction across 4 spatial scales, 3 temporal phases, and 12 service sectors. So this structure is actually designed to secure social and spatial justice by clarifying who can do what and when. For example, in the short term, the matrix ensures that communities, cooperatives, and local groups and organizations, or generally those who are owning the place and the closest to the ground, they can lead immediate actions like restoring access, repairing paths, repairing apartments, and maybe reactivating essential services. In the medium term, for example, the municipalities and local institutions coordinate larger interventions like opening streets and collecting rubbish and so on. On the long term, national and international actors can support major infrastructural and ecological restoration, but within a framework that protects local autonomy and prevents top-down impositions. This arrangement creates spatial coherence while still grounding decisions in local knowledge and community priorities. So, by integrating what we call horizontal participation, including communities, neighborhood groups, cooperatives, and local NGOs, for example, with vertical participation, including the municipalities, ministries, and external partners, the matrix redistributes power. As such, it ensures that reconstruction is not captured by a single authority, but shared across actors with different capacities and responsibilities. Time-wise speaking, and as the matrix spans multiple timelines and sectors, it ensures that each phase builds on the previous one. This sequencing is essential for justice and enhancing local agency. It prevents displacement and it avoids contradictory interventions, and it protects people's rights to remain, rebuild, and shape their own future. In this sense, we can claim that the Phoenix matrix is actually a tool for people-led reconstruction. It aligns scales, timelines, sectors, and actors in a way that empowers communities and secure a just, coordinated, and resilient recovery. Talking more spatially, Alessandra gave some hint about this, but I talk a bit more here. We start by the blue and green spines concept. The blue and green spines concept is a territorial backbone of the Gaza Phoenix framework. So it is the territorial backbone. However, it is not only a spatial design concept. It integrates mobility, agriculture, energy, and ecology, and others into a single system that reconnects Gaza's fragmented landscape. And moreover, the concept reflects our understanding that this is not this is not only a human-centric project, as Alessandra mentioned. So the spine restores ecological flows, biodiversity corridors, and non-human systems that sustain life from Wadi Gaza's wetlands to coastal habitats and agricultural ecologies. So restoring and reinforcing this territorial backbone directly confronts the long-term colonial strategy that aims to foreclose Gaza's future by degrading its soil, water, and air. So this concept shows that reviving the built environment also requires reviving its ecological system, and this is what this concept aims for in general. So this concept, by stitching both human and non-human, the spine become a counter in this sense. It becomes a counter to fragmentation and enclosure and environmental destruction that is being committed by the Israelis, not only for now, but also for long-term influence on Gaza's future. So another spatial strategy is how we dealt with mobility, for example. For us, mobility is first and foremost a matter of social justice. So the right to the city, and also it's a wartime resilience issue. So it's not just a transport efficiency. The Phoenix focuses on making movement more inclusive and healthier by diversifying mobility modes and public transportation systems beyond cars and fuel dependency. This, in turn, reduces air pollution, improves accessibility, and supports those who rely on walking or cycling. We believe that improved permeability and clear street hierarchy, from wide streets to local streets to dead ends and cul-de-sacs, will help creating safe, inclusive, and legible movement across the city. And in wartime conditions, when main roads are blocked or bombed, small connections and informal shortcuts that we call sneaks in the Phoenix plan become essential for reaching clinics, shops, shelters, and even just escaping the bombing. So, in this understanding, mobility becomes a tool for justice and resilience and everyday dignity, not just transport efficiency. In case of urban infrastructure also, as an example, I don't want to go into all the details, the strategy focuses on restoring and upgrading the systems that sustain life, like water, energy, waste, and sanitation, and so on. So the Phoenix adopts decentralization and autonomy as main principles here. Thus, it calls for distributed and modular systems that can function even when central networks fail. This approach reduces vulnerability and supports local autonomy and ensures that essential services reach communities evenly and quickly. The strategy also aims to reduce environmental pressures by integrating renewable energy, improving water management, and promoting circular practices as well. So in wartime conditions, we give really, because we imagine that we will be still living in a settler colonial system that is targeting the existence of Palestinians in Gaza and other places. So that's why we focused a lot of how to sustain wartime. So in wartime conditions, decentralization of infrastructure become critical. When main lines are damaged or inaccessible, small-scale community-level infrastructure can keep neighborhoods functioning and reduce dependency on fragile centralized systems. So the infrastructure strategy is not only technical, it is also about resilience, equity, and rebuilding the ecology foundations of the everyday life. Like, for example, in power generation sector, we have multiple strategies and tactics that varies from the regional scale to urban scale to neighborhood scale to the architectural scale, as you can see here shortly. But they all align with the overall strategy for how to deal with infrastructure in post-war Gaza. An important feature that we emphasize in the Gaza Phoenix is how we treat the rebuilding of the residential neighborhoods. And the answer for this issue comes clear in the Phoenix document when we discuss reconstruction on the neighborhood scale. At the neighborhood scale, the Phoenix identifies 4 types of interventions, which shows the framework's interest in restoring and reviving community spirits and social cohesion, as well as answering the expanding demand on housing, which was already in shortage before the war. As such, the Phoenix proposes 4 types of intervention. The first is the new neighborhoods, and here we consider that there is a need to establish new neighborhoods or large-scale projects to meet the existing and projected demand in the future. The second type is where entire neighborhoods have been demolished. The strategy calls for full redesign and rebuilding with updated regulations on parcel sizes, setbacks, building heights, safe rooms, and some other material standards to ensure safety and resilience. The third type of intervention concerns the partially damaged areas, like 50 to 70% damage. In this case, the focus is on rebuilding the destroyed buildings in that neighborhood and also redesigning the neighborhood to meet community needs by adding some public spaces like community facilities, clinics, markets, or other spaces that support social life and essential services in that area. And the fourth type is the places where, or the neighborhoods where only few buildings within the neighborhood are destroyed. In this case, interventions focus on rebuilding these buildings in addition to the repair and adjustment to streets, walkways, or open spaces to improve functionality, accessibility, and social engagement. So we can notice that in the second and the third types, redesigning and possibly reparcellation can help reorganize the space to address long-standing urban issues and allow us to correct pre-war problems such as the lack of parking, insufficient playgrounds, or poorly distributed public facilities, and so on. So rebuilding does not follow the same methodology in all neighborhoods, and redesign or reparcellation are not a separate program in the rebuilding. They here offer a strategic opportunity within the rebuilding phases to fix inherited spatial problems and create better neighborhoods than before. Based on this elaboration, we can strongly claim that theory matters and design matters as well. So understanding the fact that the destruction in Gaza is structural, long-term, multiscalar, and aims to foreclose Gaza's future, all that forces us to prepare theoretically and politically before starting our design and planning sessions. This criteria that we spoke about are essential to understand realities as they are now, but also as they can be in the future. And this is particularly important because decisions that we take as architects or planners will shape our built environment. And these design decisions shape not only the short-term recovery dynamics, but also, and most importantly, the long-term consequences. And they determine who participates in the rebuilding and who is affected and who benefits and who does not. So the space, based on its design and later usage, can resist or enable violence, and thus architecture should operate as a decolonial practice. And this is what we try to do in the Phoenix, to offer this document for architects and planners to be prepared for such an environment. Therefore, design matters because it cannot be neutral. Planners and architects must take serious responsibility, not only for their design skills, but for what their design will produce in the future. The social, the political, and the spatial consequences that will unfold for decades.
Conclude.
Conclusion. To conclude, I can say that Gaza Phoenix framework shows that reconstruction can be, and must be decolonial, regenerative, and future-oriented. It also demonstrates that under conditions of continuous violence, planning and design can protect memory and life and land. They can and they should be. And finally, I can claim that the Phoenix is not just a technical plan. It is a commitment to rebuild Gaza in ways that secure justice, dignity, and the possibility for a liberated future in Palestine. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abed, Youssef, and Alessandra for these very rich and honestly quite difficult and also inspiring interventions. Some of you were with us in the first webinar, and there and again today, we see how the ongoing Nakba of Ghazi through the different talks teaches us that both destruction and reconstruction are never total. As Youssef reminded us, he called it the unfinished. So the herbicide of Gaza is systematic, is ongoing, is unfinished project. Yet as Alessandra and Abdulrahman showed us, it is constantly contested by plans, practices, and everyday life that refuse to disappear. Destruction and reconstruction, therefore, are always being debated, resisted, interrupted, and in that sense, both are also constantly failing. This is the contradiction I want to hold onto at the outset, that herbicide is ongoing, yet it's failing. It's failing because people endure. And reconstruction is ongoing, yet it also fails to be fulfilled because it unfolds under the same herbicide. So I have been calling this de-herbicide planning that tries to weaken, to remove the effects of herbicide, to counter dispossession, and to rebuild the city and the people under incomplete sovereignty, what Youssef called municipalization. So what your talks make very clear is that we cannot treat reconstruction as a neutral humanitarian, of course, or engineering task. We have to see it as a site of a struggle over a political order, urban order, sovereignty, memory, heritage, and rights and justice. As Youssef said, framed it also. So if we do not ask what kind of justice reconstruction serves, it risks becoming another layer of violence, as we saw. I want to deepen this tension through three short comments, threads that draw directly on what you presented. The first is that shows that herbicide and reconstruction seem to be one architecture, and justify justice vocabularies and what we call just reconstruction. What does that mean? And Palestinian planning as a de-herbicide planning. So first, the architecture. Youssef's concept of neo-imperialism and the concept of his recent work also about the architecture of dispossession, with its political, economic, and aesthetic logics, and with processes like the demilitarization, the de-radicalization, the new liberalization, shows us how law, planning, infrastructure, and security combine over decades, over years, to produce a space and spaces where Palestinian presence is thinned out or displaced. Seen from that angle, the international and Israeli day after schemes for Gaza that you analyzed, Youssef, are not simply technical proposals, right, as you said, but they are the extensions of that architecture. So they decide who may return, who may not, which areas remain as ruins or security zones, what is rebuilt and for whom, and under which political conditions. At the same time, as Alessandra and Abed showed us, through the Gaza Phoenix plan, Palestinian planning is not simply reactive. And also it holds in it also hope and the drive to shift and change and design your daily and everyday space. So Gaza Phoenix is a counter logic inside reconstruction. It proposes different ways of dealing with rubble, land readjustment, housing, shelters, healing facilities, public, semi-public spaces, a community economy oriented toward dignity, toward continuity, resilience, and return, rather than erasure. So the way you both describe the collaborative work with municipalities and communities in Gaza makes clear that it's not just a document, it is a practice under siege. So the terrain we are looking at when we put your talks together is not herbicide versus reconstruction, but competing reconstruction projects within an ongoing herbicide regime. For me, like the most striking maybe sentence that follows from your analysis is that in Gaza today, the key question is not just whether there will be reconstruction, but what kind of reconstruction. We will consolidate which kind of power. So bombing clears the ground for certain models of rebuilding. Those models then help normalize what the bombing has done. And the planning question that all three of you push us toward is, how do we plan against an herbicidal architecture that already includes its own preferred model of reconstruction? Second, about justice, across your talks, we heard the language of justice reconstruction, but also its limits. So Yusuf showed us how much of the dominant discourse is framed through this, maybe distributive or procedural discourses, and how funds are allocated and or maybe local actors and international actors on all this discourse. But as you all suggested, these questions matter, but in Gaza, they are maybe irrelevant. They assume an underlying spatial and political order that legitimate and maybe complete also, when in fact, as your work demonstrates, that order is precisely what is at stake. So your presentations push us to ask more basic questions before we get to distribution or allocation or all this language of justice coming from the global north, as you all ask in different ways. Who decides whether people can return at all, and to which parts of Gaza? Which neighborhoods are rebuilt and which are left as ruins, buffer zones, or corridors? Who controls the borders, the ports, the crossings, the airspace, the port, the conditions of possibility for any reconstruction to endure? Who decides whether reconstruction stabilizes displacements or reopens the possibility of return? And drawing on what Alessandra and Abed specifically say, which rubble do we remove and which ruins do we restore as anchors of our memory and claim? And how do we protect collective land ownership while engaging, as you put it, the everydayness, Alessandra, of capital and of economy in a decolonial way? By contrast, the concepts emerging from your work and from Yusuf critique and from the Palestinian also concepts of decolonial justice highlights decolonial frameworks of justice, such as restoration, return, restitution, healing, reparation, national independence, or are not only just moral slogans, but they are also potential planning practices, as you showed us. The third, and finally, the de-herbicide planning, where I am simply trying to name what you, Alessandra and Abed, together with your colleagues in Gaza are doing, and what Yusuf also framework help us to see more clearly that planning and spatial practice used not only to repair damage, but to resist ongoing herbicide and counter continuing dispossession. And if Yusuf has shown us the political, the economic, the aesthetic logics of disposition, if I can build on that work and to claim that there's a countering logics that are embedded in your work, Abdulrahman and Alessandra, of the herbicide planning, that politically, for example, it counters the municipalization that Yusuf has highlighted through maybe a stateless, urbanized spatial sovereignty, where this fragmented sovereignty will return to be a practice of reclaim and of return, of confronting the yellow line. So municipalization, which also Yusuf analyzed as a tool of disposition, becomes in your work, Abdulrahman and Alessandra, also a potential space of resilience. Economically, in response to economic herbicide, Yusuf showed us how the new liberalization is very essential to the herbicide, but we saw also through your work how you use capitalization in a decolonial way. And aesthetically, in response to this Riviera style fantasies that Yusuf described, also the countering plans are driven by countering aesthetic logics of return, of restitution, of restoration of demolished heritage, of a ground concepts of memory and beauty and the political claim. So taking together, what I take from your work is that Palestinian planning under destruction is not simply reactive. It is future-oriented, justice-centered, and grounded in the effort to restore both urban life and collective presence. And to close, where reconstruction fails and unfinished, as Yusuf showed us, under ongoing herbicide, also de-herbicide planning, as Abdulrahman and Alessandra has showed us, becomes a political practice of rebuilding against erasure. And it seeks to counter shifting forms of dispossession and to rebuild the city and the people under this incomplete national sovereignty. And taking together, your work today shows us that even under the most brutal forms of herbicide, Palestinians are not only surviving, but using planning itself, changing the space to turn reconstruction into a practice of restoration, of return, of justice, and of renewed claims to Gaza as a living, returnable city. Thank you. And I will stop here and want to take the questions you've been sending in the Q&A. The first question is to Yusuf. Yusuf, we have a question to you, Professor Jabarim, how the concept of municipalization connects further to depoliticizing urban planning, erasing sovereignty, and contributing to neo-imperial planning. Do you see this also occurring in other cities in Palestine? Yusuf, please.
Yeah, thank you, Urwa, and thank you, Alessandra and Abdulrahman for your great talk. And in fact, I'm an editor of Planning Theory. I will be glad to receive your papers. You have a great topic and regarding this planning in Gaza and elsewhere also. It will be a good lesson for the global audience and the way we can see things through the eyes of Gaza and the eyes of the South, in fact. In any case, the idea of municipalization is central part to the Palestinian question, and it has become central for Israeli policy. So the government of Israel in the last 20 years, at least, they come to the conception that we cannot, in fact, completely finish the Palestinian question, but we need to manage it. So this is how to manage a conflict. In order to manage a conflict, the right wing in Israel, which is now the majority of the country, believe that the major idea should be to allow the Palestinians live in very tiny territorial, in terms of territoriality, tiny places with some local autonomy, municipal autonomies there in order to control themselves. And the rest of lands belong to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel, and would be confiscated. This is exactly the project now that is going on since the war on Gaza in the West Bank and specifically in Area C. So the vast majority of Area C is going to be confiscated and become land of Israel under the authority of the state itself. So this is how the state of Israel now converting the political question into a small, tiny, dismissible municipalization question. The same, so Ramallah, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, control 6-7 cities. Ramallah, Kalkilia, Tulkarim, etc., Jenin, Nablus, control like 6-7 cities, and that's it. And even in Ramallah itself, and I'll finish this section, even in Ramallah itself, where is the compound and the administration of the Palestinian president Abu Mazen, even there, the Israeli soldier can enter anytime, and they can arrest anybody from the Palestinian president compound, and they may allow Abu Mazen, the president, or not, to travel to other city. even they are controlling totally the movement, the accessibility of the Palestinians totally, entirely. And this is about municipal, how to convert the Palestinian to a municipal local agenda. The same thing, the same idea also was adopted in the Riviera plan and the Sunrise plan for Gaza. The idea there is no political entity in Gaza. There should be no political independent entity, but technocrats. These 15 technocrats are Palestinians who have no power at all, but municipal power. That means they are responsible of the sewer system, of transportation, local transportation, of these things, but no political agenda, no political seal at all, no government, no election. So the plan with the idea of municipalization is in fact to take the concept of public and residence and citizenship, to destroy it completely, and to convert, in fact, to transfer the Palestinian literally from the idea of politics to the idea of nomadic people in their cities, and to convert it also to a municipal one. So this is the agenda. This is the how to control the Palestinian question. This is the Israeli agenda for controlling the Palestinian question. That's what we are going to face in the near future, I think, not only in Gaza, but also in Area C and in East Jerusalem and elsewhere, because Israel does not finish. And we are now in very, very extreme position where Israel pushed the Palestinians to nowhere in terms of citizenship, rights, political rights, human rights, political rights, territorial rights, any rights, citizenship, any rights. So it's dismantling dispossession of the Palestinian entirely in East Jerusalem, West Bank, Area C, and Gaza. And the main tool is municipalization, of course. Instead of government, instead of political government, it's a municipalization. So this is the idea of to be a mayor. Abu Mazen, the Palestinian president, is a mayor, is no more than a mayor with limited rights and forces for Ramallah. He is limited there because Abu Mazen, the Palestinian president, cannot control zoning, land uses, planning in his city and around it, because it's controlled by the Israeli military administration. Thank you, Arwa.
Thank you, Youssef. Alessandra, the question for you, in front of what Youssef has showed us and expressed, there's a question that asks you, is it possible to have an impact, and how the framework that you are building and through Gaza Phoenix, how it can be impactful? What is the potential of it to be adopted by international discourses or international bodies that Youssef also has analyzed their logic? So please, Alessandra, you think we can have an impact through your plan?
Thanks, Arwa, and thanks for the question from the audience. Well, I should be wearing like a turban for the fortune teller now. But I would like to use a term that I think only in Finland exists. It's called sisu. Sisu is the steadfastness and the reaction and the agency that is exercised when you think that no hope is left. There is still something left. So I think, yeah, we are.
I love it.
This is a very. I had to come at the end, almost at the North Pole, to get to know this very compelling and relevant for our context term. If we had no hope that this approach would have ever had any effect, we would have never done it. Of course, as I said before, it's against all odds. But also, and here is the historical vision that is very important, and that's why we have to know history and global history very well. And I reconnect with the Iranian history, actually, when it was still Persia. There is a very famous battle, the Salamin battle, that occurred between, back then, the mega empire that was Persia and the rising Greece. Greece still then was not a state, it was a union of municipalities, so of polis, from when politics comes from. It was against all odds, but the Greeks knew the place very well. They had a very, very minority in terms of power, military means, etc., but they had a very strong knowledge of the place. They were able to trap the Persians and their mega army in their territory, and eventually the mega empire lost. These things occur sometimes in history if you know very well what you're doing. We are trying to do that, but I can say, and here I connect also with something that Abdulrahman probably will develop better afterwards, that is that things are already happening. And this chaos and this gap and this vacuum and this uncertainty is also very fertile ground if you want to. We like to always look at the other side of the coin, the one that nobody ever looks because it apparently is less interesting. But it is an opportunity. So we are really seeking for opportunities everywhere, and something definitely is already occurring. The ceasefire is months old and nothing has happened. But something that we instead are like we've been doing is already taking ground. So it's already something, no?
Thank you, Alessandra. Last question for Abdulrahman. How can the memories of genocide that exist as pieces of evidence of the destruction in every corner in Gaza be translated in your plans of reconstruction, and how is memorialization included in your work? And please wrap up with that, and we can take a couple of minutes to end our webinar, please.
Yeah, actually, thank you for this very difficult question. And I think there is no clear answer how to deal with these things, because these things also touch different types of people and different types of understandings. And in general, we cannot, as planners and architects, decide for people. However, we have some knowledge and practice, and of course, cases that we studied before, and we are trying to translate into how these things can influence and become a kind of sometimes even catalyst for urban regeneration and urban development and healing in some cases. So in the Phoenix, for example, we have one of the criteria in the Phoenix is preserving heritage. And in heritage, if we go into the details, we also talk about memory, we talk about collective identity, we talk about significant spaces, significant episodes, and all of them for us, they constitute what we call the heritage. So the heritage is not only the physical artifacts, but also the living experience in the past, but also in the present, including the genocide. And in this regard, we dealt with them as they have to be included wisely in the reconstruction process. And in some cases, they can be used as catalysts for urban development and regeneration. And in some cases, they can be used as also for healing. But of course, this, as we also state in the Phoenix, this needs some specialists also from different fields that were not with us in the Phoenix, particularly psychological environment, but also heritage studies that deal with healing. But in general, it is something that we try to touch upon And we envisioned some ideas how to use and how to make the best use of heritage and in all of its material and immaterial dimensions in the healing and recovery and restoration of the Gaza. I have to mention that there is a very obvious tendency in Gaza now, as we are already in touch with people in Gaza, and using these heritage spaces, even the spaces that were places of traumas, they are trying to use them for collective identity and for collective remembrance in order to strengthen the people. Like, for example, in العمري لا sorry العمري المسجد العمري, the Al-Umari Mosque, they are trying to collect the stones, but also near Napolsi Square, they are trying to make it as a plaza. So also to reinforce that how they struggle to survive the war. Don't forget that many of people are also they are very well collapsing, but on the other side, there is a kind of pride and like of not happy feeling, but pride feeling that they survived the deadliest Holocaust in the 20th century. So I think this can help in answering the question.
Thank you, Abdulrahman. So ending our webinar, thank you very much to the speakers for your remarkable work and inspiring presentations. Thank you, Youssef, Professor Youssef Jabarin, for unmasking the logics and concepts of the ongoing herbicide and help us to uncover it. Thank you, Alessandra, for showing us how countering concepts of justice has driven your counter planning for reconstruction. And thank you, Abdulrahman, for translating for us these concepts to practice, showing us that it's not only slogans, but it can be also implemented in planning. On behalf of all of us, thank you for being here today. Your questions and presence remind us that Gaza's future is still very important to our heart, and not only being destroyed and planned over, but also being reclaimed through the ways Palestinians continue to reimagine, to plan, to struggle for a just city. I want to also remind you all that we have a final events in our series. Please join us for the Phoenix of Gaza XR. It's a VR exhibit on April 14 and 16 at Brown University, which uses immersive 360 degrees footages and documentation to bring the viewers into Gaza's historical landmarks, cultural life, and everyday resilience. And we have also a panel visualizing Gaza healing, recovery, and restoration on the 16th. Thank you, everyone, again. And this webinar will be also published through YouTube. Thank you.